So I guess let's go to the intro and just introducing who we're going to have today on the program. We'll start out with Arno Dumasterali, co-founder of the Blinc Group, chairman of ISO and Sense Standards, and chairman at Vape Safer. We have Doug Fisher, general counsel of Active and president of Vape Safer. Drew Hall, head of government affairs and chair of the sensory program at True Terpenes, VP of research at Vape Safer. Pamela Epstein, Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer at Terpene Belt Inc. Pamela is VP of Policy at Vape Safer. We have Laura Kogelman, VP of Communications and Public Affairs at PAX. She is VP of Comms at Vape Safer. Mark Marin, General Counsel at PO. We also have Jen Gill, VP of Regulatory and Quality at Abstrax Tech. And last but certainly not least, we have Luna Stour, Head of Impact at Ispire Vape Technology. Again, I want to just thank everyone for being here today. I guess, let's just kick this off and talk about exactly what is Vape Safer and how did this group get together?
Sure, and I'm happy to field that one to start. Vape Safer has come together over the past year or so, and our goal is to be the unified voice of the cannabis vaping industry. This is a small industry, and we're always talking as like-minded companies who care about quality and safety and choice. And we faced some crises together, whether it was the Valley in 2019 or the PACT Act. So, we kind of understand the power of collective action. Last year, I brought up the idea of organizing more formally. Pamela Arnaud and others had also done that. And there just started to be a ton of conversations and a bunch of themes, three in particular, emerged from those, right? One is there's a lot of misconceptions about vape. What is it? What are the harm reduction benefits? What are the differences between nicotine and cannabis vape? It's a really clear need for education of the public, of policymakers, and consumers. Two is safety, of course, right? All of our companies prioritize safety and we have our own protocols, but we know that those efforts can be supercharged by working together. And there's also related safety issues that may not arise out of the flavorings or the hardware, but that impact us nonetheless right now. So, take, for example, what we're hearing about pesticides and lab testing in California. We think it's critical that vape hardware and flavorings have a seat at the table for those discussions. We bring a unique perspective and expertise, and ultimately safety requires understanding and fit between all of the inputs in a finished vape product. And then finally is sort of that vape has been more or less an afterthought when it comes to cannabis policy. Activism has been focused, rightly so, on broader issues, but vape is, almost a quarter of the market. So it's critical we get the regulation right. We need regulation that ensures safety and preserves choice. And there have been a lot of attempts to port over e-cigarette regulations into cannabis vape. And that's a bad idea and inappropriate for a number of reasons. Cannabis vape is a different thing with different benefits. And it also has existing guardrails thanks to state regulations. We'll get into that more. And then second, and just to put it bluntly, e-cigarette regulations have failed spectacularly. The FDA has a pre-approval process. It's received millions of applications for approval of vapes, and they've approved a total of 34 products, all offered by Big Tobacco. What this has done is led to an enormous unregulated market of nicotine vapes where consumers can't tell what's safe. And that sort of approach would kill the cannabis vape market, and I don't think that's a dramatic statement. Consumers would lack safe choices, and they would be pushed into an unregulated market that doesn't have the same kind of quality insurances, while cannabis companies would be looking at about a quarter of sales evaporating. So, we all realize we've got these three issues in common and we need to work together. And over the course of a few months, we decided to organize more formally and launch this group.
And Doug, and just for just the regional aspect, are all you folks in the U.S.? Are you in certain markets? Is there, do we have some folks in international markets here? Maybe just talk about the breadth and scope here of the groups involved.
Absolutely. So the group is focused on U.S. policy as it relates to cannabis vapes, but most of the businesses involved certainly have international presences. I can speak for Active. We do business in many countries around the globe. And I know that's the case for some of my other colleagues if they want to chime in about that as well.
Yeah, I think we're working around the world, and we have a chance here with policy and the work that we're going to be doing in the U.S. to really influence what's going to happen everywhere else because people are looking to us, people are looking to Canada, people are looking to the countries that have legalized first. So really the added value we're bringing here to the U.S. can be used worldwide. And second, I also believe that as Doug said, we are a big part of the cannabis industry, the vaping sector, and the biggest issue is that right now, a lot of the advocates and policymakers know the big names in terms of broader cannabis, but they don't have the expertise to really nail down anything specific about vaping. And I think that's really where we come in and are able to be that expertise, to be the go-to group that all of these other groups go to, like NCIA, like the Hemp Roundtable, and all of these other groups that navigate around cannabis will be able to use us as a resource specifically for that.
We touched on you touched on a little bit on the mission of Vape Safer, but maybe just talk about how you plan on carrying that out, on the ground.
Well, there's a number of avenues. I think maybe Pamela can speak to the work on the policy side, and then maybe Drew and Jen can speak to some of the standards work as well.
Yeah, I didn't know who that question was directed to. So, vape safer policy. I think we're taking an agnostic look at how to approach vaporized products. So, there are cannabinoid products. It's why, as Arno said, anywhere from hemp to cannabis, you're going to be able to come to this group and be able to understand how to promote sensible safety. We want to look at testing, traceability, education, transparency, reaching out to all buckets of stakeholders from the end use consumer all the way backing up into those who are making regulation in this space so that they can truly understand how the product functions within the larger ecosystem so that they can regulate sensibly. Because what we've learned and what we've seen, both from tobacco and from within regulated marijuana, is when you regulate from a place of fear, you don't get compatible regulation to the consumer, and you actually benefit the illicit and rogue marketplaces. So through this organization that focuses on standards and education throughout that continuum, you're really going to see a touch point of sensibility, which is not something we've seen in the marijuana space yet. I think we're working towards the goal.
And just to double click on what Pamela's saying, I think, much of our primary engagement will be with policymaker and regulator audiences, and we really look forward to that collaboration. But at the heart of everything we are all doing is the consumer. And consumers are coming into this category for a variety of reasons, from, discretion and portability to harm reduction because they don't want exposure to combustion byproducts to, flavor and just overall experience. And we're trying to ensure that we have the, sustainability as an industry, economic health to be able to continue to innovate on that experience and deliver to consumers what they're ultimately looking for from their cannabis. And so as much as, we do have very specific priorities tied to our mission, what we're trying to do at the end of the day is ensure that the consumer voice is represented through and through and that they have access to the products that they want.
Just picking up on this policy aspect, has the alliance developed specific policy priorities? Do you see, just some general shortcomings? As as we all know, this is a very patchwork, state by state, even some city by city, county by county rules, and maybe just talk a little bit about how you engage with stakeholders when it comes to laying out policy and trying to find some consensus because obviously everyone kind of it's hard for everyone to kind of meet in the center in this industry.
I think we approach that through, and I'm going to invite Drew to talk about standards, but it's showing up, right? You have to meet the moment and show up where these conversations are being had. So it's providing comment when new legislation comes out. We saw recently the Wyden bill. We comment on that. We comment on rescheduling from the lens of the vaporized product sector in the state by state conversations. Whenever there is an opening of regulation or there is an opportunity, that is where we're going to come and bring the expertise of all of the actors that you have as part of Vape Safer, because that's really the only way to get towards standardization within a patchwork, is to infuse where you want to go. And that's going to have to change based off of the discussion that you're having within that local jurisdiction or at the federal level. And hopefully you can meet, Chris, like you said, in the middle, because it's going to come federally. It's going to have to engage with FDA in an area that they're uncomfortable with. They've only regulated tobacco thus far. We are not tobacco in many ways. Most importantly, in that cannabis has a long, rich history of being safer as a product, as a harm reduction aspect. And so we're going to have to educate through what they know to get to the other side. We're also not captured. A lot of times manufactured goods have a very wide breadth and they don't get hyper specific. And that's really one of the things that we're going to have to educate on, from the consumer to the regulator and the legislator, to get to that midway point. And that really happens through science, safety, and standards, so that it can lead the conversation where we want to go and ultimately have more diverse products, because we don't regulate out of fear. And that specifically we'll touch on, I'm sure later, is the flavor component.
And maybe this is a good point to talk about adjusting standards in the industry. And if there's, a push to somehow standardize either technologies or, what is actually contained in the oil, maybe just talk a little bit about standardization.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in on standards here. Starting off, it's such an incredible group to be leading a standards discussion, because every hardware and terpene company here on the call today has already embraced a broad range of standards internally. So a big piece of coming together was taking an understanding of what third-party standards all of these companies are already using to lead the pack in terms of safety and product quality and supply chain quality, coalescing those into ideas that underpin points about legislation. And so often it comes back to having the right partners, whether that's ASTM or the Cannabis Regulators Association, to continue to push standards forward that we may or may not have all already embraced, but are certainly all moving toward, as well as working with regulators in these policy discussions to understand where standards do and do not apply. For example, a lot of regulatory bodies have referenced the FDA inactive ingredient database. And in almost every circumstance where we've seen it referenced, it's really been misapplied. And we even have FDA representatives that have attested to that fact. So as a group coming together and having such a multi-state presence, as well as, political activity in a number of different markets, we can kind of connect those dots. So the Cannabis Regulators Association and the FDA and our group are talking to a state legislator and educating them about whether or not this particular standard, the FDA IID database, applies in that circumstance. And then just take that as a microcosm for what we're doing on all these range of products. So whether it's got to do with hardware or supply chain, recall, toxicology of ingredients, in every single circumstance, we look to the third-party groups that these companies on this call are already using. We understand that high bar that we're setting, and then we come up with a technique and a method to share that with regulators and third-party standard setting organizations.
Is there, and I know we barely touched upon this in some of our pre-calls, but I know that, Ohio, for instance, since they recently went rec, they're still kind of operating under medical rules. Eventually, though, they're going to get to a higher THC potency when it comes to vape products. I think right now in the med market, it may be capped around 70%. In the rec market, I believe it's going to be around 90%. Do we know of any other kind of markets where they're looking specifically at, vapes, either, potencies. I know taxing has been an issue in the space when it comes to, higher potencies tend to get taxed higher. Again, this is in some markets. I believe New York was at least one of them. But maybe, there's some developments that folks should just be aware of in the industry as we look at, kind of this patch by patch kind of system that we have when it comes to regulations and rules.
Yeah, Mark, I was just going to push this to you, Mark. Perfect.
Yeah, I can jump in. Thanks, Chris. I think with respect to New York, I think actually recently New York just removed that differential on the tax. But yeah, we've seen potency cap bills introduced in Colorado, Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, Washington. If not introduced, certainly discussed by lawmakers. We obviously think that this is bad policy. We don't need to go back to a prohibitionist regulatory scheme. A lot of these I think Laura made the point earlier about regulation being based in fear, and that's exactly what's going on with potency caps, is that you see these wild stories from the New York Times or the Washington Post talking about the most extreme case of psychosis or what have you, but it's not based in science at all. And in fact, there's really no peer-reviewed science that suggests that there's any further harms to a higher THC product than a lower one. Not only that is that the effects of a full spectrum cannabis product are not reducible strictly to THC percentage, but are rather mediated by complex interactions between cannabinoids and terpenoids. And so, we think that any push to limit THC is going to be, it's not going to do anything except push consumers into the illicit market. And, again, to protecting consumer choice, we think that we're going to need to, stand strong against the THC cap.
And maybe we can pick up a little bit that on market. The illicit market, obviously, a major competitor in almost every single regulated market we have in the U.S. Certainly out here in California, some people think that the unregulated, unlicensed market is bigger than the actual regulated one. I'm sure there's some truth to that. But maybe talk a little bit about, how you guys are kind of looking at this illicit space. Obviously, a lot of problems during the vape scandal in 2019 was a lot of really just unregulated products. They were really at the heart of the problem. A lot of them coming from, China and other Asian countries. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you guys look at, the illicit side of vapes, because I think that, you have a lot of consumer concerns, and there's still a lot of education to be had. Because I know that, we had a couple of our colleagues go out to New York recently, and it was still difficult to get regulated weed products in New York. Even now, the market has almost been open for 2 years.
It's the opportunity. Oh, Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly, and then Pam, maybe you can follow. I was just going to speak to the first point, which was EVALI and the 2019 vape crisis. And yes, a lot of that was attributed to the vitamin E acetate and the illicit market products. So I think our industry has learned from that history and a lot of science and identifying some components that we will not be using in the regulated market. Vitamin E acetate is one, diacetyl is another. And one of Vape Safer's policy priorities is safety and quality. So we are like-minded companies, and we've invested heavily in a lot of the continuous research to better understand these products, the hardware, the ingredients are used in them, so that we can continue to identify opportunities to make safer products and expand this list of ingredients that we won't be using in the regulated market. So that's one thing that I think differentiates us from the illicit market, is that we are learning from these mistakes and we are advancing our products and the safety of them. Another thing that will help us be competitive with the illicit market is to continue allowing consumer choice and not allowing these flavor bans. The Vape Safer priority regarding flavor is to advocate for sensible flavor regulations in the adult market. variety and choice will encourage consumers to continue using safer regulated products. Pam, do you have more to add to that?
Jen, I think you hit the salient nail on the head, right? This is called sensible regulation, and that's our main policy priority, and it infuses across all metrics, and it goes towards our supporting access. The more dispensary outlets, the more outlets in general that are selling safe quality product, the better off we will be. And so that's how we will coordinate with other associations in order to build that bridge. You want to have lower barriers to entry, more quality products into the marketplace, and that has to disseminate all the way down to the consumer. They need to understand why they are going to make the choices that they're going to make and how they can access those. Because right now, as you pointed out in New York, it's easier to access illicit product. So we have to do the work to train the regulator to create a framework that allows for the high quality products to raise to the top and to maintain diversity. Because Jen, you hit the nail on the head again. Prohibition doesn't work, and it just creates an environment that services a need when access is low.
Maybe could we just talk a little bit more on this flavor aspect? And I'm thinking about, as some markets restrict, certain ingredients in vapes or flavors, I'm thinking about potential new markets that are going to open. We're running out of them in the United States, especially when we're talking about medicinal. I think we have 40 states that have some medicinal program in DC. Rec, I believe there's 24 that are legal. I think there's 21 with an active retail marketplace. DC, has legalized adult use, but of course they need an approval from Congress that they have not gotten yet. Maybe, as we look at potential, places for business opportunities, they're essentially in red states at this point and some very conservative states in the Midwest. Are there concerns about, more restrictions entering the marketplace? Because once you have these restrictions, when you open up the market, it's very difficult to unravel them.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is yes. And I think even before you get into the concerns of these states, you look at sort of how the federal government has handled flavors when it comes to e-cigarettes. And there's been effectively a de facto ban on flavors. The FDA has refused to approve products with it, and it's cost lives. Full stop. It has kept people smoking cigarettes rather than switching over to harm reduction products. And that is the first concern. And you're right; it won't roll back when if a state adopts something. The way to address flavors and the very valid concerns people have about them when it comes to appeal to youth is through marketing restrictions, through advertising restrictions, and through point of sale age verification, right? And the cannabis market has been remarkably successful at age verification. Every time you see a secret shopper study done in any state, it's 99 to 100% compliance. And so the cannabis industry in a lot of ways has succeeded where tobacco has failed. And so I think what we need to do to avoid these restrictions that are understandable on your face, they have a certain logic to them. I understand why a regulator would see a flavor ban and say, oh, that's a kiddie thing, is to educate them that the effect of that is to push people into an unregulated market rather than to stop people from using them, right? And by the way, that unregulated market doesn't have the age verification. It doesn't have the checks on quality.
Doug, I'd love to chime in on this flavors discussion too. And Chris, I thought you made a great point about, does this ball always keep rolling and gaining steam in terms of are regulations constantly additive? But let's look at a marketplace like New York, where the medical market had pretty strict regulations about the flavors being added to products. Those were scheduled to be imported directly into their recreational market. I worked with an association in New York directly with the OCM, and those have been updated to now just being ingredient restrictions that are actually very difficult to understand. As an ingredient supplier, they really don't mean much in the way that they're currently written. And I think this is something where this group has a great opportunity to not only advocate for better regulations in markets that are coming online, but to working with already regulators in places like New York and California and Oregon that have some flavor-esque restrictions on the books already, and helping them rewrite that language so it achieves the ends that they're looking for, marketing and labeling and advertising directly to children, being banned, while also allowing cannabis to continue to express itself. Because as an ingredient supplier, and we study this plant so much from what flavors it produces, this is the most diverse producer of volatile organic compounds on the planet. There are very few plants that even come close to having the range of aromatic expressions that cannabis does. And that's something that regulators need to understand better from a technical and chemistry perspective, on top of having smarter legislation that respects that kind of interesting plant chemistry that's being brought to the table.
I love that. I love this concept that there's like a respect to the nature and the complexity of the plant. And I think that we also need to do that with our consumers and our brands too. You know, we're seeing so many people worried about getting into the vape space because they are worried about returns, popping, leaking, clogging, contamination. And, you know, we have to be honest too that a lot of the illicit market is copying and pasting from the mainstream manufacturers that are doing good things. So if we get our ducks in a row, a lot of these issues with counterfeits and some of these, you know, I was at Jetty Extracts during what we called it Vapegate. And it changed our whole lives. We got thrown out with the bathwater. And that's like our passion in this is to actually bring nuance to the conversation. It's been very black and white. And the consumers are the ones that miss out because they get a bad experience. They see a recall. And to your guys' point earlier, we're really pushing people away from having the best experience, which is, you know, not only hurting, you know, business and the economy, but it's actually hurting our ability to grow as a society and actually give the people what they want, which is the most natural expression of the American dream is supporting small businesses, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's something really important to consumers and retailers that are really having issues. They don't even want to touch vapes sometimes because they're just so unsure about how to talk about them. So we really want to give language so they feel empowered to say, actually, we do have ways to address your concerns. These are what they look like. So, you know, we want to include more than just the regulators, folks like us that have the time, energy, and passion and nerd out on this stuff. There's people that just have anxiety about vapes and they don't really have the language. They need someone to help craft that narrative. And that's what we plan to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much of this space, you know, misperceptions about lack of education and just awareness out there. Before we get into some other topics, sustainability, maybe just talk a little bit about how others can get involved, brands, manufacturers, you know, potentially other constituents.
I think one of the main ways to get involved is to contact us. And again, we are just forming, and we're getting our boots on the ground. So we'll look at every input we can get from operators, from industry, from regulators to see how we can move forward and address certain issues. There's also a very good way to get involved is if you know of any bill that's going on in your state or in your jurisdiction, bring it to us. And I think info@vapesafer.org is a good way to start, or contact any of us at firstname@vapesafer.org to have any kind of information that you are interested in, and most importantly, interested in participating with us in this big endeavor, which is kind of avoiding what happened to nicotine vape to cannabis vape, especially here in the U.S.
Absolutely great points, Arno.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we're going to send out some communication about membership and tiers following this. And just to echo, there's a lot of committees and a lot of ways to get involved. One of the cool things about the group that's on this panel is people have really diverse expertise. So whether you want to contribute on the communication side, on the lobbying side, on the scientific side, there will be opportunities.
Sustainability is a big issue across the space. How will Vape Safer address the environmental impacts of vapes and advance this area?
I'll take a first stab at this one. I think one of the main reasons that we have issues in terms of sustainability is the regulatory support. There needs to be regulatory support. I was just on the phone with a producer from Massachusetts who got fined because they sent their products to a hazardous waste facility to get disposed of, and they had no clue how to handle it because it is nowhere in the regulations. So there are definitely some things we can do. For instance, materials and recycling. Use different kind of materials, use different kind of packaging that has already been used or that is recyclable, refillable, reusable systems, extended producer responsibility. This is something that can be very, very important for any market. And a lot of markets out there already have this, but we do not, because we do not have this regulatory support. The three solutions I just gave you are only possible with support from cannabis regulators, waste regulators, and mostly state and local government entities. Regulatory support can be improving the text of the regulations themselves, could be a tax rebate program. There's something in France, for instance. I'm sorry, I'm French. I have to speak about France a little bit. In France, there's something called the eco tax, which is an extra cent on top of any product that is contributed to building routes. So the different governments, entities can go take trucks and go do pickup routes for all of these products. So there are a lot of challenges ahead with sustainability, but we need to have some regulations in place to allow to overcome those challenges. Because as an industry, we can use as only recyclable materials, only clean materials. But if there's no means to get rid of them, then there's no way we can handle it.
Do you envision, because you have such, expertise in all these groups of putting out, white papers, best practices, tips for maybe retailers or, event holders, because vapes is such a gigantic category. I was just looking through headset data. I think it's $4.3 billion in 2023. I think it's the number 2 form factor across the US. If you're looking at younger generations, they are using vapes more so than other products. And I know that there's a lot, a cost analysis here because you want to meet with the consumers where they are. Obviously, they love these types of products, but we also have major issues when it comes to just protecting our planet and finding where these products should end up. Maybe just talk about what you guys planning on doing in terms of giving out some talking points, white papers to let folks know that there are some options out there. It's probably going to be upon the industry to take hold of them and run with them, because as we know, when it comes to rules and regulations, everything is just such a slow moving ship.
Yeah, well, Chris, I mean, I think that's one of the big intents and purposes of this group. Certainly, regulatory reform is an important piece of this, but I think working as an industry to proactively lift up, what folks are doing and share best practices around how others can up level and get on board with that. When you look at the folks on this call, there are a lot of small actions people are taking already to try to improve their environmental footprint. A lot of folks are using more sustainable materials, better packaging, different ways to approach batteries and recycling. And all of these are small things that, in isolation may not have a huge impact, but together, once we can kind of get a little bit more groundswell of movement and motion across the industry, can start to move the needle. But I think, just taking a step back, the painful irony here is that some of the folks who care the most about the plant, the planet, and sustainability are both operators in the cannabis space and consumers of cannabis. It is something that is so intrinsic to all of our values. And so the fact that there are so many challenges and limitations is personally painful on, that gut level. And I think we're super committed to trying to overcome that, as much as we can, while still giving consumers what they want and not driving costs up so significantly. And I think the nice thing for all of us on the phone is that vape has such a unique opportunity to impact this, both on the cannabis side and on the hardware side. We talk so much about cannabis specific to vape, but I think people don't really understand the amount of investment and R&D and innovation and IP that is happening on the technology side. Many of the folks on this call are really changing the way that people experience cannabis. And I think that kind of just impact is really significant. And if we can mobilize it towards sustainability, there's a lot we can do.
Absolutely. Great points, Laura. I want to just give everyone a chance to kind of give some parting thoughts before we start our Q&A with folks. So I'm just going to give everyone the floor for a minute or two, and just if you want to leave some lasting thoughts, you can, but definitely not necessary.
I'd love to share with the group watching how important the next 12 months is going to be for the future of cannabis regulations writ large. We're in such a dynamic period. So many things have coalesced. We're really at a major watershed moment for different pieces of cannabis legislation, whether that be in the hemp markets, recreational or medical marijuana markets. And then there's so much indication that things are going to happen at the federal level in the very near term. It's such an exciting and dynamic period. If anyone has even the itch to get engaged, now is the time to do so.
Fantastic.
I think that's. Oh, and I'll if I can, I'll give one parting thought as well, if that's all right. I think first of all, Drew, amazing point. The other is, and I know I keep harping on nicotine and e-cigarettes, but the reason for that is it's rare that we get this one-to-one roadmap of how something is going to turn out absent our intervention, right? And if the FDA is a hammer right now, we look like an e-cigarette shaped nail. And we're not. And it's incumbent upon all of us who care about the future of this industry and this form factor to make that case convincingly and to act in a way that backs that up and earns us credibility with the people who are going to make those rules. And so, to echo Drew, now is the time. There are regular, you see it in the CAOA, you see it in the CSRA. The language around vapes looks nearly identical to what enabled the FDA to absolutely wreck the e-cigarette market. And we need to do something about it, and sooner rather than later.
Yeah, there's a difference between ENDS and ECDS, electronic cannabis delivery systems. And I know that was one of the comments on the chat where we're trying to make sure that those two are completely different products and are treated differently. Just a silly example, in the US, all the flavors are banned. It's really hard to get regular vapes. In France, I am reimbursed by Social Security 65 euros because I switched from smoking to vaping. And in a lot of European countries, that's the case. So there is this kind of double effect of what's going on. And as Doug said, let's make sure cannabis vaping does not turn into what nicotine vaping has turned on the regulatory side.
Great points there, Arno. Yeah, continue.
I'll just add that I think one of the issues that the FDA had with the traditional e-cigarette industry was their attraction to minors. And so one of the policies that Vape Safer definitely wants to focus on, an additional policy, is labeling. And we want to promote responsible, accurate, and sufficiently informative packaging and marketing standards. And we all strongly discourage marketing to minors. So hopefully we've already spoken to the age gating of cannabis products, and also with the labeling, hopefully will help the FDA have confidence that we're preventing these products from being more attractive to children or child access. So they won't.
Yeah, they really are different. Nic and vapes, they both are similar in need for consumer safety. They're the device itself, the hardware, and preventing the unauthorized use, of youth vaping. And they offer, the nicotine vapes use consistent and mass-produced liquid, whereas in cannabis, every oil is different, all the formulations and the viscosity, and it requires so much more customization in cannabis vape tech to get optimal coil temps and airflow, ensure best user experience, all these things. And annoyingly, they kind of often get conflated because the form factors are similar, but in terms of market size, the nicotine vapor market is 20 to 40 times the size of the cannabis vapor market globally. So, just something to think about.
I think I'm going to wrap this up right now. We're going to turn it over to Q&A. I'm going to bring Kelly back into the fold, and we can address some questions that the audience may have.
Well, one thing I've noticed, there's a whole lot of questions. So it's a very active chat. It's exciting to see everybody reaching out and for you all to be responding. I think getting this conversation started, getting alignment is super important to this industry. So I commend you all for what you're doing. So there were a lot of questions. Brandon Byrne, in particular, asked, how do we conduct the necessary scientific research at the academic medical level with these products still in Schedule 1?
Well, I'll speak to this. I know that research has been a challenge for us. We have been able to overcome some of those obstacles by identifying labs in certain regions, having the product manufactured in that region with the lab. And the labs have to be licensed to be able to test the product. So it is very limiting. It is very challenging. Hopefully by rescheduling or descheduling, ultimately, we'll be able to expand our capacity to conduct this testing. But I'll say a lot of people on this call are already being creative and finding ways to conduct that research that is so necessary. And I know a lot of us also participate in the development of some ASTM standards to identify how to approach that type of research and toxicology assessment.
And just to put a finer point on that, we have to let science lead this conversation. It is essential. And many of the folks on this phone are doing a lot of this work already. I know Active and Abstrax have partnered on research. True Terpenes and Packs have published peer-reviewed frameworks for evaluating the safety of additives in vape products. I think Dr. Shauna is on the call. So a lot of this work is happening in a creative way, and a lot of it already has been published and peer-reviewed. So we take this very seriously. And this is something that, as members of this group, we're committed to continuing.
And when you look at the barriers to this, it's crazy. And I'm sorry for everyone else, but for all the hardware manufacturers here, can you imagine having to make a product without being able or being legally allowed to test it? So I mean, there's a lot of ways around it, but it's completely mind-boggling. And I think the same is true for terpenes. Is if you can't test them, then how do you get them done, and how do you do all the research on it? That's why Schedule 3 is an important step, although not the final one.
Yeah, and I'll add that was actually one of the comments that we made as an organization when it came to rescheduling, was that as currently drafted, it's not going to allow testing of off-the-shelf products in dispensaries the way that's really required and needed. You're still going to have a DEA registration and a DEA license, and have the product be produced by a DEA registrant. And hopefully the DEA is listening when Vape Safer and several other groups I know that have made this point say, that restriction needs to be loosened as part of the rescheduling process.
Absolutely. There's also a lot of questions. Darwin Millard in particular asked, does Vape Safer intend to lobby for the adoption of the new ASTM guide, and what are the specific standards development goals of Vape Safer?
I'd love to speak to this ASTM guide. We don't have a definitive answer yet. I'm going to go with a soft yes, but considering that it's most recent publishing, it still has to be reviewed by the larger group. And there's so much technical information in there. We have to go through and understand it exactly. But I know our very own Dr. Shauna worked very hard on that standard. And it's certainly something members of this group have been pushing for. We do need to review it as a group, though. Its publishing was so recent, it's hard to say yes right away.
Wonderful. Hunter Neubauer asked, do you have a conversation going with CANRA? CANRA.
CANRA, for those who don't know, is the Cannabis Regulators Association. They are actually broader than just cannabis. They include regulators of all cannabinoid products. And I think we want to have a open forum relationship with them as much as a trade association and a regulator can. We, myself, Arno, and Doug were at the most recent external CANRA conference, and we were able to meet the regulator and provide them with the necessary educational information about where we want to go. And so the short answer is yes. The long answer is that's an iterative process, and it starts by building credibility and trust. And that is what we bring to the table by our collective companies, the desire to show up and to provide the tools and to understand that getting to yes means sometimes you have to work with the regulator and build comfort. You don't get everything all at once. It is, like Jen had mentioned, advertising, labeling, packaging. Sometimes you have to give more there and be more restrictive in order to get more diversity of flavor. And so it is a jigsaw, puzzle piece where you have to move things around in order to find where they appropriately fit. And that's a dialogue with the regulators. I would say to the operators and to consumers, let us know what you want and then have that dialogue on how to get there. And don't be discouraged if you have to give a little to get more. The more science we have, the more research we have, the more that we can show with purchasing power that you go to a dispensary, but you want more diversity. That will read to the regulator in a way to get them to give more in terms of open regulation.
Wonderful. Michael Sexton had a couple questions. One surrounding define safer, less harmful, specifically how cannabis relates to tobacco. And then he had a secondary question on, is there evidence that customers are going to the illicit market due to the lack of regulations that don't exist here? And how do you quantify that without survey results?
I think we do have quite a bit of survey results. It's kind of the same thing about with flavors, is when people are looking for flavors, it's not attractive to kids. I mean, look at the alcohol industry, who's putting out vodka bottles that are flavored with watermelon and strawberry and kiwi and all of that. Is that intended for kids? No, it's not, because there's age gating. As Doug very correctly said earlier, there is age gating in our industry. So that the attractiveness to flavors is something that we all deal with in our lives every day as adults. I think one of the main things that to answer Michael's question is the ingredient list and the research we can do. Right now, we are at the infancy of understanding what are the ingredients in a vape. And they're not only influenced by the hardware and the terpenes, they're also influenced by the way people vape. If I take a 2-second puff like this, I'm going to have certain properties in the vapor that's exhaled. I'll take 2-second puff like this, a lot less vapor. It's still a 2-second puff. How do you measure that? How do you deal with the variables of how people are using it? And I think that's going back to the standards piece, and that's why we really need to work with ASTM standards and make sure we're pushing those. And a lot of the ASTM standards are also based on other existing standards from multiple industries. When we don't have to reinvent the wheel, let's not do so. I mean, we've got enough on our plate as a nascent industry, and especially as a cannabis industry. So yeah, let's avoid reinventing the wheel with standards.
Amen.
And I think just to go back to the first part of that question, a lot of the conversation around safer comes from the concept of harm reduction and comparing, the consumption of an aerosol versus smoke and all of the, toxic byproducts that are part of smoke. So I think right out of the gate, that's an important distinction. But then certainly we're thinking about safety in terms of all of the different factors we've been discussing: inputs into the oil, hardware, components, the air path, and whether it touches certain other device components. I mean, these are all things that affect ultimately what goes into someone's lungs. And, vape is a challenging category compared to, things that people are ingesting, because our lungs are different and absorption is different. And we have to make sure that we are using really data-driven and kind of scientifically informed ways of thinking about safety. And so, these are all really important conversations. And, in an emerging industry, we're seeing new things pop up, in different states that are making a lot of folks make choices about what they're including in their products. And I think that is positive. Consumers increasingly want higher quality products. That's what the market is demanding. And so I think the more that we can start having these conversations in partnership as an industry and with regulators, the faster we can get to a place where consumers understand how to navigate.
And also on the Zoom out, I just came back from Colombia. I'm in Chile right now. Like, this is trickling down. They are really watching and looking at what we're doing. They're super interested in going to the next level. And I know that that's technically, what's happening in the world isn't really our focus, but I just want us to realize like how important us being role models in this space is when we're traveling around the world and you're like, oh, I miss California because I can get, nice hardware and regulated vapes. Or you come down here, and seeing some of these people actually are importing really high quality tested vaporizers from the US that are being imported. It's kind of crazy to see over the past few years how much this education and us holding this high level and this high bar is really impacting the global cannabis and nicotine scene. Like, the literacy building is huge. And I just want to shout out everyone working on this, because not everyone has the savviness, the access, the resources, the constitutional rights that we have in the United States. So us utilizing our voice and our ability to lobby and do this work is really doing it for the entire global cannabis community.
Absolutely. And I think, everything you guys are doing to move things forward is just going to take this so next level. I'm wondering if you can recap again how people can get involved if they want to contribute. There are people interested in contributing research or their own resources in the chat. How can they do that?
Well, visit us at vapesafer.org or write to us info@vapesafer.org. We're also very soon we'll send out to everyone who was on this webinar and everyone who signed up on our list communication about membership, how you can become a member, the various committees you can join, and all the ways. So, and then as Arnaud said earlier, reach out to any of us on this call as well, right? We're all here to advance the cause. We're grateful for anyone's involvement and contributions. So please don't be shy.
And follow us on Instagram, vape.safer.
Love it. Chris, any closing thoughts before we sign off?
I just want to thank everyone on the panel for bringing your A game. It was a really great discussion. I think we need these discussions in our industry because vape just touches so many different points of use and safety and technology and IP. It was a great conversation. I appreciate all of you guys' time.
Big thanks, Chris and Kelly. Great moderation. We really appreciate you both.
Thank you all so much. We'll see you soon.
Everyone.
Bye, guys.